Hi everyone, this is Gary Fox, Country Manager of RightScale Australia. We'll be starting the webinar in just a few minutes. Give a little bit of time for others to join in. Hi all, thanks again for joining. This is Gary Fox, Country Manager here with RightScale in Australia. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for making the time and joining us today. What we'd like to do is just quickly start off with a series of 3 polls so we know a little bit more about you as attendees and your experience with RightScale on the cloud. That'll help our presenters are all live and make sure that we're up to stage just right on the right message for you. Let's start off with the first poll, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks. You can see the questions here about cloud adoption. RightScale has clients who are both new to cloud and are trying to get the best out of Amazon, as well as others who have been quite experienced and perhaps running at scale. It's useful for us to get an idea of what the audience here is. We've got questions such as, what's the adoption? And the results are mostly people are getting started, 3/4, which is great. This content is going to be very appropriate for you. Well, let's have a look at the next poll. I'm only doing 3 today. The second poll here is about whether you're using AWS to a large or a small degree. In Australia particularly, I think we're going to see a lot of hybrid clouds with clients deploying an on-premises cloud environment as well as using Amazon and mixing the two together. RightScale is particularly good at that. Others are 100% web business, a startup or a web development firm or someone who's totally on the cloud. So there's a degree. So if you just help us by letting us know how much of your business is in that spectrum. Small portion. Quite commonly we're seeing around the world, Amazon have clients who start with a small element, proof of concept or something like that, then move on. Let's have a look at the last poll. This is asking about how you manage Amazon itself. Many clients use the console, and whilst others have started to use tools like Puppet, Chef or RightScale, management platforms. As we're going to be talking about RightScale and also the mature use of supercharging the platform, it's useful to get a perspective on how you're doing that at the moment. Some API users out there, quite a good number there, which is a great thing, and some third party. It's more mature than I think we were expecting, which is great. This will be very interesting. Thank you very much for taking the time to fill that out. That's the 3 polls that we wanted to get through. So as I said, my name's Gary Fox. First up, I'd like to just briefly introduce the local team in the Asia Pacific region. So next there, thanks. We've got in Singapore, Shervin. We have also members across the region, Stephen, Rudel, Brad, Shindo-san in Japan, and Chris who is in Australia. There are others in the region. This is just the team leads in each of the countries. Next, thank you. So today, you'll get to hear from Hassan, who's in Scotland and live, Siobhan and Ryan, who are in our US office, and standing by for questions are engineers in the region, Stephen and Rudel. So there's a panel in your webinar session, control panel, that you ask questions anytime. keep them going. We'll be tracking and making sure we answer either through the sessions, by the presenters in the moment, or at the very end. So remember to pop those questions in. So straight into it now. The first presenter you're going to hear from is Hassan. Over to you, Hassan. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. Let's jump straight in. So first of all, why cloud cost forecasting matters. Well, we've seen like cost is one of the major factors in cloud adoption. We see over and over the cloud providers talk about cloud costs, how much they're costing and how much money they could save. So why cost forecasting? And when I say that, I mean it both in terms of prior to adopting the cloud and also after adopting and budgeting for future use. So first up is to really better understand where your costs are going within your cloud spend. So are your major costs are going towards your server running hours, towards your database, towards storage or data transfers? Where are these costs going? And once you understand that, you can start to better optimize your deployments. You can design deployments and systems that are cost efficient. Also, combined with that, there's loads of different purchase options available from different cloud providers. Amazon alone has reserved instances, has spot prices, has on-demand pricing. So it's really to understand that and make best use of that. And also, elasticity is one of the main benefits of the cloud. So you will start off with a small system and over time increase your usage and increase your size of your systems. So to scale up, that's going to cost you, and to be better prepared for that and avoid that bill shock that we hear so many people talking to us about, this is when you can budget for it. But currently it's really difficult to kind of predict costs. One is that growing infrastructure requirements. You're not really sure how much you're going to grow by. If you're going to grow by 20% versus 10% or so. So you need to do a couple of scenarios to see best, worst, and kind of medium in the middle. Also, it's really complex. The cloud providers have adopted this kind of really complex pricing structure and tiered pricing models for their services. Amazon alone, I mean, we have, in PlanForCloud, we have 5 cloud providers listed, and from these 5 cloud providers, we have over 10,000 different price points. So it's really complicated. And also prices keep changing. We heard last week, and actually yesterday, 3 cloud providers again changed their prices. So AWS, Google, and Azure have recently changed their prices. So it's hard to keep up with the pace at which these prices are changing. So this is why we created PlanForCloud. It's essentially a free cloud cost forecasting site, and you can forecast your costs in 3 really easy steps. First up, you define your requirements and your growth patterns. So you say, these are the number of servers and storage units I need. This is how data is going to be flowing through my system and the databases. And you're going to define, kind of say, how you're going to change over time. Is it growing by 10%, 15%? Your storage requirements are changing, and so on. Next step is we'll actually take that entire deployment and run it through a 3-year cost simulation to produce a detailed cost forecast of when costs are happening and how much this is going to cost. And this essentially lets you build scenarios to be prepared for what's about to happen. So as I said before, we currently support AWS, Rackspace, Azure, Google, and Software. And the best thing about PlanForCloud is that you don't need any cloud credentials. Essentially, because we run a simulation engine, all our simulation engine will do what a normal cloud provider would do for you. So we don't need any cloud credentials from it. So I think I usually like to show a demo of actually how PlanForCloud runs. So let me just open it up here. There we go. So this is the PlanForCloud website. As soon as you jump in, you can start to have a look around. We have this idea that you don't even need to sign up for PlanForCloud if you don't want to. So we've got this button up here. You can click and log in as a guest. And that will take you to our dashboard. This is where you can start to define your deployments. And a deployment is a collection of servers, storages, databases, and data transfers. We literally yesterday released this new feature. You can now, if you are using AWS, you can import a snapshot of your AWS into PlanForCloud and project going forward. So that's pretty cool. Let me open up this example 3-tier web app so we can walk through it. So first, this is our deployment design page. First, we have our servers. So as you can see here, we've got a load balancer, peak web server and a base web server, and it's really easy to add new things into it. So we just click Add Server, and this will bring up a filter list. So let's say we want AWS, we want it in Australia, running a Linux system. Currently we want on demand, and we want more CPU, let's say 4 CPU units, some more RAM, and this filters down our list of available options. So let's say, okay, we want a standard large, that's up here. We can say how many of these we need and how long they're going to be running for. And all we do is then click Add Server. And that's our Add Server, that's our server at the bottom here. So this is a multi-cloud tool. So you can see here in our storage, for example, we have storage for web servers, but we're taking backups onto rack space. So we can design multi-cloud things. Next is this cool idea of a growth pattern. So I'll demonstrate it here. We have a main database, which we say starts at 300 gigabytes of storage requirements. But as the system is changing over time, we're going to be adding 10 gigabytes onto our storage requirements. Now you can do this with quantities, with transactions, with sizes, across everything. So once you've designed that, at any point during the design, you can click the See 3-year cost report, and it should take about 2 or 3 seconds, in which we will actually take the entire deployment and run it through the simulation to create this kind of report, cost report. So what can we see? Well, first up, we can see our costs broken down by month at the top here. You can see we have some peaks in our costs, and this is because we are using 1-year reserved instances, and this is when the reserved instances have to be renewed. You can also see a slow growth in spend over time, and this is because of our pattern that I showed you, in which we're using more and more resources. We also have temporary patterns in which you can define over Christmas, double up my servers, and then in January go back down. So these are the smaller peaks here. Next is a total cost breakdown. We see a lot of people start to use this to optimize their deployment. So you can see 65% of my costs are going towards my server and database running hours. Do I really need my servers on 24 hours a day? My development team might only be in the office from 9 to 5. How much money could I save if I build that scenario out? And then the cool thing you can do is up here you can change your purchase options and usage. You can say, okay, I'm using reserved instances. What would happen if I change all of these to on-demand? And I can click the update deployment, and we should see a different kind of graph. There we go. So our spikes have gone. Our total cost has gone up on the server side, and our costs have gone up considerably as well. So this in itself is one scenario. What we can do now is clone this scenario and change it to anything we want. Different types of instances, different purchase options, different clouds, all these kind of things. And through this scenario building, we can start to define in the future what our cloud usage will be, how much that will cost, and budget and essentially plan for using the cloud. So that was a live demo. I'll now hand it over to Siobhan, who will talk.
Great. Thanks, Hassan. So before we go into the topic that I wanted to talk about around visibility and control, I wanted to orient you a little bit about what RightScale is, just to give you a little bit of context in terms of what we're providing here today and really where RightScale sees the world. Sorry, one moment, just pulling up the slideshow here, you should see something. Pardon the difficulties. In any case, RightScale's been doing cloud management for 6 years now in terms of working with AWS, and all of the power that these customers are looking for on cloud really spans across different industries, right? If we look at how these customers consume cloud, they're really looking for a variety of, or to satisfy a variety of use cases spanning scalable web applications, perhaps some gaming scenarios in terms of social gaming or otherwise. But really, if we look at the type of customers using clouds, it spans everybody who we've already heard of, whether that's media companies like NBC Universal or Comcast in the United States, to hotel companies like International Hotel Groups or Quest Diagnostics or telephony and handset companies like Ericsson, and so on and so forth. So really, RightScale's been working with a number of really early adopters who have been leveraging cloud for their core business. And a lot of what you're hearing today represents the learnings over these last 6 years. So now if we switch back to the topic at hand, which is really around visibility and control, what does that look like? What are we talking about here? Well, in the 6 years or so that we've been working with folks trying to use cloud in Amazon.com, we've seen a few different approaches in how they're leveraging cloud for their business. If you look at this slide on the left hand, you see somebody who's much more strategically thinking about how cloud will be used in their organization. Plan for cloud, or plan for the future, as Hassan was talking about earlier, right? Really looking at what your consumption will be and how it may change over time. Start there. And then from there, move forward into what your organization wants to use today, right? And enable them to do that and on cloud. From there, you can take learnings, right? You can iterate, you can measure, and take that into account as you move forward with more and more consumption on cloud. That's one way to approach how you consume cloud. On the other side of the fence, right, on the other side of the divide, and now on the right side of the slide, your organization may already be using cloud today. And, you know, that's something we see a lot of. So the organization at first step, right, is already using cloud. You as a manager or somebody who's seeing invoices or expense reports understands that the organization is already using Amazon. And from there, you're put in a position to figure out what's going on. And then from there, once you figure out what's going on, take that into account as you plan for the future. And over the 6 years, we've really understood that the left side, really planning in advance, is more of an ideal situation, and reality falls more on the idea that an organization at large is already doing something on Amazon. The service is just that fantastic. And in order to really embrace cloud, you have to backpedal a little bit, take control of the organization's consumption on cloud, and then move forward organizationally and sort of holistically to take advantage of the real power of cloud computing. So in order to facilitate that side, in order to figure out what's going on in your cloud consumption, there are two real key pieces that RightScale has built functionality around that really resonates with how you can understand what happens in cloud. The two areas are security and visibility more from a cost perspective. So if you think about security for a moment, you have production environments, production applications running in the cloud, and these may not be managed by the original processes you put in place for your traditional IT deployment workflows for your production applications. So the common questions that come up are, where am I exposed? How are things configured? Are they compliant to the processes and procedures I previously understood? And then from there you go into, once you answer the security questions and you're no longer concerned about, am I vulnerable? You then think about, well, wait a second, what is this costing me? How much is my spend? In the previous slide, you may have seen a quote that we've actually heard from our customers, which is, I see all of these expense reports with Amazon.com charges, but people can't be buying that many books. And so you think about, how does the monthly cost break down, and what are these resources in fact being used for? And let's take a look at what that actually means. So let me switch then into the RightScale system here. And here we are in the RightScale system. This is what the RightScale dashboard looks like. And I'm currently in a demo account, so you'll see some applications running and you'll see some that are stopped. In this particular instance, I have multiple applications running, indicated by all of these green lights here that you see on the deployments listed here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Reports menu and show you two really key capabilities within RightScale that will enable you to understand and see what's going on very quickly day one. There are two reports we're going to cover. One is the infrastructure audit, and we'll go there first. The second is usage estimate. So first, let's go over to the infrastructure audit and take a look at what we have here. If you'll notice these two tabs at the top, security groups and SSH keys, what RightScale gives me the capability of doing is being able to scan all of my cloud environments and understand what my configurations at a security level are. In Amazon, that security is based around security groups, so it's a very flat networking model. And what I can do is perform a new audit that enables me to see all of the ports in which access is allowed to my server environment. Now, I've already run this report recently, and I'm going to look at one that's already been run. Here, I'm looking at a security group audit report that shows all of my ports across all of my clouds, across all of the security groups that specify the rules for these ports and the configurations. And I also see the amount of servers and the number of servers which are using these security groups. And if I want to, I can click on any of these security groups and drill down into the individual security group rules information. But here, at a very high level and very quickly, I have the ability to understand how each of my servers may be configured. And this will enable me to understand, hey, is port 80 open on every single server, including servers in the back end, like my database tier, where I really don't necessarily want that port to be open? So you can really quickly start to understand the capability of this report. Similarly, I can run a report around SSH keys and understand who has access to each of my servers by running a simple report. The second report I wanted to cover is the usage estimate. And this goes back to that visibility against how is my cost broken down. All I'm currently seeing today is one of two things, either a rolled up monthly report provided by Amazon or a single line item on a developer or an IT manager's expense report that highlights some charges to Amazon.com. Well, here I have the capability of understanding with more granularity how that cost is broken down. I can see by this report, which runs periodically, which cloud I'm consuming, what service within that cloud I am consuming, what the rate is based on that cloud, the service, and the size of that service. So, for example, an instance, it can either be a small, a medium, large, or any of the variety of instance types that Amazon supports. I can see how long that server has been running or how long that service has been operating for, what the estimated cost is, what the start date is for that cost, as well as the end date. And right away, I can get a better understanding of what my spend really is and how these things break down. And then I can move forward even further to further understand what's on these instances, etc., etc. I have some totals down here at the bottom for you to see as well, which really should match up very closely to those monthly bills. So there is some reconciliation capability within the platform. So now, if we go back to the slide deck here, let's just recap what we talked about. As a quick takeaway, the key point to understand about cloud management and about consuming on cloud is how do I have the tools and capabilities to understand whether I am utilizing cloud effectively for my organization. And then how do I make sure that I continue to do that going forward. So we talked a lot about the policy management capabilities within RightScale. We showed the infrastructure audits and what that means from a visibility standpoint. We talked about the usage capabilities within RightScale around tracking cost and spend on a monthly basis and understanding how that applies back to the individual cloud resources. RightScale has more capabilities here, and ultimately, as your organization's consumption of cloud grows, you'll want to take care of or take into account additional capabilities such as, well, how do I do my identity and access management? Should my security engineer be able to set my security policy, and should he be the only one who's allowed to do that? Should my developer have access to launch servers in my production environment, or should they be able to troubleshoot environments, etc.? Right? And then even beyond that, how do I start projecting out my costs? So a lot of this will come full circle back to even what PlanForCloud offers that Hassan was talking about earlier. And also going forward, it will help you plan additional consumption on cloud. Let's now shift over to Ryan Geyer, who's going to be talking a little bit more tangibly about how to launch and consume cloud resources for your organization. Ryan?
Great. Thank you, Siobhan. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how you can use RightScale and the constructs within RightScale to really organize the resources that you're using in your Amazon accounts and cloud consumption. So the first piece of that is something that we call a deployment. And a deployment is something that's probably familiar to you if you've ever built a system or set up and then deployed an application. Really, to us, it means the same thing as it means in a data center. It's a set of servers and equipment, although virtual, that are required to actually stand up and maintain an application. Now, what's really powerful about a deployment in the terms of using it with RightScale is that because we have a UI tool and we present to you those different virtual resources under a single pane of glass, it gives you a few things. It enables really broad adoption across your organization. It's really easy for operations people to look at this and really understand the servers that are available, and they have very powerful tools that allow them to manipulate that environment and see what's going on. But you can also give users more granular access, or perhaps less granular access, in as much as they can have just observer permissions to RightScale. And they can look at those deployments and sort of at a glance understand what pieces are required for an application, much like the visibility that Siobhan showed you earlier, but at even a higher level within the UI there. As I mentioned, it gives you a single view. So for a single application, you're going to have resources which may span multiple Amazon regions, maybe different resource pools entirely. Within RightScale, that deployment displays and shows you all of those different resources in a single place. Of course, it makes it really easy to organize and understand the purpose of each one of these resources and virtual resources and machines by giving them human-readable names. And those could be organized by things like the application that you're running, by the particular part of the application lifecycle that it's in, staging, development, QA, production, and so on. And we can even break it down by a particular department or team that's working on a specific project. And we can actually break that down by different RightScale accounts even and provide some capability to report across that entire organization. And then lastly, it gives you the ability to very easily reproduce those configurations. It may be a particularly complex environment, which I'll actually show you here in the demo shortly, a fairly complex environment that consists of a great number of resources which have relationships between them and have specific configuration options and so forth. The deployment allows you to very quickly and easily clone that entire environment and get a whole new set of those same resources that are configured very much the same way, but then allowing you to slightly customize that for things like perhaps rolling out a new version of your application code, or maybe testing a new version of an operating system or a patch or things of that nature. Given the elasticity of the cloud, it gives you the opportunity to actually launch a completely different environment that's configured in the exact same way to test those changes. So we'll go ahead and go into a demo here that will actually show that in the RightScale dashboard. So Siobhan earlier showed you the RightScale dashboard, and this is, again, that same RightScale account. And it's actually showing a number of the different deployments that are in this same RightScale account. So we have a few different types of applications, a Microsoft.NET IIS application, Elasticity Web Demo, and a few others here. The one that I want to focus on for this conversation is the one called Sharded Application. And this deployment actually shows an entire application that actually runs two siloed versions of the same application, one in Amazon Singapore and one in Sydney. So you can see that we have shard number 1 here with a master and slave database, 2 front-end load balancers, and 2 PHP application servers, and those are all running in Singapore. And then we also have a second shard of the application. Again, 2 database servers, a master and slave relationship there, front-end load balancers and PHP application servers, and that's running in Sydney. So you can see we would have a situation here where we might use latency-based routing for DNS to send users to whichever of these 2 shards is more appropriate for them. Or perhaps we would home a particular user or users or organization to one or the other shard. The idea, though, is that this is a pretty large number of servers. We have 12 servers running here. This is a base configuration for this application. But we can very easily take this whole configuration and clone it, as I mentioned before. So by simply clicking the clone button here and accepting the confirmation here, we're going to end up with an exact duplicate of this configuration. So all of the detail that went into this in terms of the version of the application code that's going to be pulled down, which I'll show you on the Inputs tab here. Things like the version of the application code that's going to be loaded, the name of the database lineage that's going to be used for backup, other things like that, the fully qualified domain name of the database servers. Those are all inputs that you can pass into this deployment. And you can change this. So if we were, for instance, going to try a new version of our application code, we would change this input here that's currently unified PHP. We could imagine maybe that's version 1.0, and we wanted to try version 1.1 without disturbing our production environment. We could change this input, and then back on the Servers tab here, you can see that right now none of these virtual machines are actually running. We've just copied the configuration and the metadata. So we would then be able to launch each of these servers and end up with an environment that is, again, identical to our production server, except for that one change that we made, which is to deploy a new version of our application code. We could then run regression tests or whatever we wanted to against this environment without ever disturbing our production environment. And then if it were successful, we could move our DNS records over and use this new deployment as the new production deployment. So I'll switch back to the slideshow, and we'll talk about the next topic here, which is lifecycle management. So RightScale gives you a great number of tools for managing an application as it goes through its entire lifecycle. So we discussed how the deployment can show you a fully kind of assembled application and all the resources that are required for it. But the first step of that is to actually design that deployment and design that infrastructure. And RightScale provides a number of pre-built reference architectures and tools to be able to create those deployments. It includes a wide range of open source technologies, HAProxy, Apache, MySQL, application server technologies such as Ruby, PHP, and Python. And then those are assembled into popular 3-tier web application stacks. 3-tier stacks for PHP, Java, Ruby, IIS, .NET, and Python. Relational database technologies such as MySQL, Postgres, and Microsoft SQL in various different versions for MySQL and Microsoft SQL. And then we also have the ability to share and even single bill for independent software vendor published and supported templates and technologies. So some of the examples of that are load balancing, commercial versions of certain relational database technologies and NoSQL database technologies. Things like application monitoring agents and infrastructure that gets set up to collect that monitoring data. So I'll show you very briefly what the multi-cloud marketplace is, the sort of online store that we use. That's what we call it, where all of these technologies can be found and imported into your RightScale account and used in deployments. We'll switch back real quickly to our web browser. And this is what the multi-cloud marketplace looks like. So you can see that there's a number of high-rated server templates here. Any of the ones with the RS blue logo here are ones that are created and supported and maintained by our engineering group. And as I mentioned, there are all sorts of software vendor technologies in here as well. So one example is a commercial PHP option, which we've partnered with Zend for. And there's a full solution pack with Zend server-based PHP application servers with our load balancer server template and database server template, which give you a full commercial PHP three-tier application stack. I also mentioned some of the monitoring technology. We have scripts that are actually not complete server templates, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but just single scripts that you can use to install the agent for App Dynamics and then be able to collect that data. That's one of the monitoring technologies that we support and that we've partnered with. So once more, back to the slide deck. We'll look at sort of how this process happens and what the steps are involved. So we've discussed a little bit setting up and launching individual servers, which is something that you can do through the dashboard. You can also then assemble those servers and resources into deployments, which then start to describe the relationship between those services and servers and virtual resources. We also add the ability to do monitoring and automation for any one of the servers that's under RightScale management. And then using that monitoring data, we're able to do things like automatically adding and removing servers from a deployment, automatically remediating level 1 support issues, things like maybe a memory overrun, you can clear a cache or restart an application service, things of that nature. RightScale also gives you the ability to very easily then clone, copy, and update not only entire deployments, but even individual resources. Perhaps you wanted to create another read-only database slave. You could then clone one of your database servers and make some minor changes to the inputs to that and end up with a new database slave server. Then at the end of this, we're also going to cover the what if. Once the server is up and running, your infrastructure is working as you expect it to, what happens if something goes wrong or something changes state that's out of your control? So we're going to cover a couple of specific scenarios when an Amazon availability zone goes down, or how you might hotfix your application code. Or do something like replacing an SSH key across a fleet of servers. So before we get into the details of those specific scenarios, it's worth describing exactly what a server template is. I've mentioned it a number of times now throughout the presentation, but a server template is the blueprint of an entire server and a configuration. So a server template is based on a base operating system image, and we natively support Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, and various versions of Windows. The agent RightLink, which is what facilitates a lot of this automation, is actually compatible with a wider range of operating systems, but those are the ones that we do regression testing against and that our engineering team actually maintains an existing set of images for. So it starts from that base operating system and then uses configuration management scripts to be able to configure from that base operating system to a specific role. So I showed you the Zend server template, for instance. that server template would take a base operating system and then with scripts install Zen Server, configure it, download and deploy the latest version of your application code, and do the steps necessary to get that up and running. Even go so far as to identify the load balancers that are running in the same deployment as that application server and get registered with them. So we'll actually go to the next slide here and show sort of a simple example of what that server template looks like. This is a screenshot of one of our base server templates, which by its name you can imagine is fairly lightweight in terms of the scripts that are associated with it, but it gives you an idea of what the server template does. The scripts that are associated with the server template are actually broken down into 3 distinct types or categories. The first is the boot run list, which is does all of the configuration that we've already talked about. Configures the server to be the specific role that it's intended to play. Can use those scripts to discover its peers or dependencies within the same deployment. Establishes things like network security by discovering other servers and setting up IP tables firewall rules between them. The second group is the operational scripts, and these are things that can be either run manually through the dashboard or through the API by a user, or they can also be automated from our monitoring and automation, which we'll talk about in a moment. And again, I like to think of these as automating level 1 support, things like restarting Apache and flushing the cache and things that have to happen on a periodic basis where you might normally have a ticket that gets created and then a user goes in and follows a run book. Instead, you can actually automate that entire process to just run this script that will do the correct task to clean things up. Then the last category or type of scripts, and the screenshot doesn't represent it because it's a very simple server template, but we have the ability to have decommissioned scripts. So in the boot run list, we discussed how a server can discover other resources and other servers in the same deployment and register itself with them and so forth. Decommission scripts are essentially the inverse of that. They're able to, before the server is removed in case of auto-scaling or other events that might be automated, it allows the server to gracefully remove itself from a deployment. Things like removing it from a load balance pool or closing an IP tables firewall rule which may have been created. So we'll talk about the monitoring and automation here momentarily. What we do is actually monitoring individual virtual machines. So we actually have visibility at the application level. And we can monitor not only base server statistics like CPU use, disk use, network I/O, and those sorts of things, but also things that might be very unique to your application. The number of current logged in users, the number of open sockets, things of that nature. Using that monitoring data, then we're able to alert on that. For any one of the metrics that we're pulling back, we can set a threshold, and if that threshold is passed for that metric, then we'll actually kick off an escalation. An escalation can actually be a simple single task, or it can actually be a series of tasks that if the alert still exists over a certain amount of time, it'll continue to escalate to different execution paths. So initially it might try to run a script to restart Apache. If the condition still exists after that, after perhaps 5 or 10 minutes, maybe it'll send an email to a junior sysadmin. If the condition exists for longer than that, maybe it'll send another email to a senior sysadmin and so forth. You can actually set a series of actions which will occur. We can use that, of course, not only for automatically running scripts and rebooting servers and sending emails, but we also use that for our auto-scaling mechanism. So you might use a common statistic like the number of Apache requests per second or maybe even CPU use, and we can use that to determine that we need to add or remove servers from a deployment, which, since we're using that server template methodology with the ability to dynamically configure the server with exactly the same parameters and exactly the same assets, we can end up with a server that's exactly the same and get it up and running very quickly and participating in a deployment. Then we also can orchestrate things that are day-to-day operational tasks as well. Things like database backup and failover, the ability to execute scripts across an entire fleet of servers, which we'll cover, as well as code deployments and patches, which we'll cover in the what happens when section. So we're going to cover two specific scenarios with the what happens when scenarios here. And in the interest of time for the demo, as well as not poking the demo gods and providing an opportunity for an issue, I've actually used slides to kind of demonstrate that. But I can assure you that the task that I'm about to show you, I have actually performed in order to get the screenshot. So these are all effectively real demonstrations. The first one that I want to show you is what happens if an availability zone goes down. So what we're going to show is what happens when a couple of your servers in their deployment are no longer available, how you can recover from that situation. Then the second will be if your application or your infrastructure requires a hot fix. So something like actually deploying a new version of your application code because you've discovered some sort of problem, or running a system security update across many servers. The process will be the same. I think the actual example is going to be deploying a new version of your application code. So for the first one here, we're going to demonstrate what happens when one of the availability zones goes down for your deployment. So this is another much simpler deployment of just a single shard and a single application. And we can see that US East 1B has gone down, and the servers that we previously had running there have become unavailable. So what we can very easily do here is select those two servers that have gone down, and then using the bulk action down at the bottom of the deployment screen, we can choose to relaunch those servers. We'll of course get a confirmation, and then upon confirmation, it skips right into the next demonstration. So once you confirm that, then it'll actually go ahead and launch those two new servers, and they'll be back up and running, and you'll be back to the full capacity that you had. Now, before you went through the process of actually checking those two servers, you could have gone in and changed some settings, maybe selected a completely different availability zone, maybe made some changes based on the knowledge that you had about the outage that was currently happening. So the second example here is going to be deploying a new version of your application code. So perhaps you have that very complex sharded application up and running, and you discover that there's perhaps a security problem, security hole in your application, or maybe you need to put a new image in place for a marketing update, something very simple like that, but it needs to happen right now. What you see here is actually the scripts tab of the deployment, and this is going to show you a list of all of the operational scripts which can be executed across all of the servers that are in that application or in that deployment. So it's that scripts tab there. And you see that there's this do update code script. This is the one that actually goes ahead and downloads the latest version of your application code and deploys that onto each of the running servers for you. So we can very quickly click on the run button here. It's going to ask us to confirm the servers that we want to execute that on, and so we've got our two PHP application servers in each shard. We want to select all of those. And then we go ahead and click the button to go ahead and run that script on all of the servers that are in this deployment. And that will take just a few minutes, and we'll execute that script, and then all of the servers will be up to date with the latest version of the application code. So with that, you've seen sort of the ability to do the organization of servers into a deployment, and then the application lifecycle of how RightScale can really automate a lot of those steps of managing that and setting up those deployments. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Siobhan to take us out.
Great, thanks, Brian. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time covering some questions. We've had some good questions from the audience, and I'm going to call on folks who have been presenting in this session to help us answer some of these questions. So let me start with Hassan, who you heard about from PlanForCloud. Hassan, we have a question here from the audience. How relevant is 3-year forecasting when prices keep changing every few months, or even like today and yesterday you said there were some cloud changes?
That's a great question. So we've seen AWS alone reduce its price by about 20 times since it launched, and as you said rightly about during reInvent, AWS reduces prices. Before that, Google reduces prices, and now Azure has reduced its prices. So one good thing about all these changes has been the price has always been a reduction. So when you're looking at assessing cloud and trying to budget for future use, we find that many users are assessing on a yearly basis. They see from now for next year how much would it cost and those kind of assessments. But Amazon also does 3-year reserved instances, and so a lot of people are using that assessment, and that's why the main reason that's why we're looking at 3 years.
Great, thanks, Hassan. And that's really a valuable point here, especially with the new region having launched in the Australia region. You know, the 3-year reserved instances capability is pretty powerful for those looking to consume cloud across many or for long periods of time. So one more question we have here, and this one goes back to Ryan. So Ryan talked a lot about server templates and what we have available in the multi-cloud marketplace, particularly how our engineering team even publishes a lot of these server templates into the marketplace. They happen to be in Chef today, but the question specifically is, I don't know Chef. Can I still use your server templates?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And as you pointed out, Siobhan, our engineering team is using Chef to produce the latest assets that we have. What's really great, though, about the server template methodology and about the way that RightScale works is that you can actually mix and match Chef code as well as what we call write scripts, which are effectively any executable script that the underlying operating system understands. So things like Bash, Perl, Python, Ruby, whatever you're familiar with, you can use. So you can actually create an entirely new server template of your own devising that are based entirely on write scripts, or you can even mix and match, as I mentioned before, Chef recipes as well as your own scripts in a boot run list or as operational scripts or decommission scripts.
Great, thank you. So that's really powerful part of RightScale, where you have a lot of choice and flexibility in what you use and how you use it. You know, our engineering team is really providing one way of server templates, and really that's because of the efficiencies they have, given that they understand Chef, but you have a lot of choice, a lot of freedom to use what you're familiar and comfortable with. Another question we have here is, let's see, we're doing fine on time, so we have a few more questions here. So another question that just came in over the wire is more around the types of clouds that we manage. So RightScale really focuses as being a multi-cloud management platform. Here the question is, I heard you can manage private clouds like CloudStack. How does that work? Do all the functions you demoed work on a private cloud too? That's an excellent question. What RightScale provides is a very rich set of capabilities that enable customers to manage applications, manage your workloads on cloud. And we do manage across multiple types of clouds. So Amazon and other public cloud providers are supported. And we do also support private clouds, including CloudStack and OpenStack. And that works very similar to how we work with Amazon. You have a cloud that you set up. You register your cloud with RightScale, provide the same type of credential information to your cloud like you would for an Amazon cloud. And from there, we go ahead and do all of the API integration like we would on Amazon, make all of the appropriate API calls using those credentials, and are able to do all of the same capabilities, the same functions, from being able to plan your spend all the way through to being able to audit what happens on your cloud, and then from there being able to not only provision your application and your workload on cloud, but be able to manage it specifically around those scenarios that Ryan mentioned, as well as other scenarios as they come up for you. So let's see here. One last question that has come up is about some of the stuff that I presented, actually. How does RightScale enable me to control security groups? This is a good question primarily because it helps to expose how deeply integrated RightScale is on the clouds that we support. So the capability of security groups and it is fundamental to how you do networking and network isolation for your application, for your workload on cloud, on Amazon's Web Services or Amazon EC2 Cloud. Within RightScale, you can create, edit, remove any number of security groups and the associated rules underneath. So we have an entire UI capability or web-based interface that will allow you to control, create, modify, delete security groups. On top of that, you as a user need to have the privileges associated with being able to control security groups. So there's that extra level of configuration on your user within RightScale that enables RightScale to make sure, one, you're allowed to do this, and two, you have the full capability in order to be able to control your security groups. So with that, I think we've answered all the questions that have come in. Let's move on to the last slide here, and it seems like I just closed it. So, whoops. Great. So in terms of what coming out of this webinar, what we recommend as your next steps, there's really three things, right? The first is start simple, start early, start with how you plan to consume cloud. And as Hassan talked about and demonstrated, try and simulate what your cost structure is with PlanForCloud so you can really get towards a forecast that accurately depicts what you will do on cloud in time. Specify all of your growth patterns, plan it out over a few years, and make sure that as you grow, you continue to optimize on your cost with cloud. And as you start to mature within your organization around your cloud consumption, consider using tools like RightScale, a cloud management solution where you can take advantage of, the capabilities we've shown you today, starting with the visibility and control capabilities all the way into a lot of the application-focused capabilities that RightScale has. To take that further, you can create a deployment, use a server template from our multi-cloud marketplace, start with monitoring, understand how your application is performing in cloud, report off of it, and grow organically within your deployment within RightScale. And as your complexity increases, start to consider where your expertise trails off and where you need help. RightScale has a number of cloud solution engineers and support professionals who are available to help. And we've listed some contact information here for you to reach out to our regional representatives who can assist you further. I've just been told that there was a question, but unfortunately we've run out of time, so we're going to go ahead and pause. We will answer the question offline. Once again, everybody, thank you very much for attending. We hope you've received a lot of valuable information. For next steps, we've outlined what you can do individually, as well as provided some contact information to contact RightScale and learn more about the cloud management solutions we offer today. Thanks.